The dollar bill was still warm from his fingers when it landed on my legal pad like a slap. Not tossed. Placed. Dead center, right between my case notes and the court's flimsy tissue box, as if he'd weighed the humiliation and decided precision would hurt more. I was standing at counsel table in Part AR2 of the Manhattan Criminal Court, my blazer pulled tight over a blouse I'd ironed at 2:11 a.m., because sleep felt like a luxury I hadn't earned. The courtroom smelled like old paper, disinfectant, and the bitter coffee someone spilled near the back row an hour ago. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, giving everyone the same sickly color: defendants, families, court officers, attorneys with their expensive watches and perfect hair. And then there was him. He didn't belong under fluorescent lights. He belonged in shadow and candlelight, in rooms where people lowered their voices without realizing why. When he leaned in from the gallery, close enough that his breath brushed my ear, I caught the clean bite of expensive cologne layered over something darker, smoke maybe, or cedar, or the faint metallic tang of danger. $1, he murmured, voice low and amused. That's what they pay you for a man's life, counselor? I didn't move. I didn't look at him. I kept my gaze forward on the judge's bench, as if the air beside me wasn't suddenly too hot, as if my pulse hadn't started pounding against my throat like it was trying to escape. On my pad, the bill lay crisp and new, the kind of money that had never seen the inside of a vending machine or the bottom of a thrift store purse. It was a prop, a message, a private joke at my expense. I'd been a public defender for 3 years. I'd been called worse than cheap. But something about the way he did it, quiet, controlled, confident that the world would bend around him, made my vision sharpen. Like the part of me that had learned to swallow humiliation for survival, suddenly decided it was done. The clerk called my case. People vs. Santoro, counsel approach. My client, Frankie Santoro, rose beside me with shackles clinking softly at his ankles. He was 22, face still boyish under the bruises the holding cell had gifted him overnight. He looked at me like I was the last solid thing in a room full of quicksand. I slid the dollar bill off my pad with 2 fingers, folded it once, neat, and stood. When I turned, the man behind me was close enough that I could see the faint scar slicing through his left eyebrow, the pale gray of his eyes like winter glass, almost colorless in the courthouse lighting. There was no badge on him, no title, no reason for the bailiffs to treat him differently. And yet every court officer near the door had shifted when he walked in. Not fear exactly, something older, something instinctive. He smiled at me as if we shared a secret. Ms. Hart, he said softly, reading the name stitched on my card that hung from my neck. Sienna Hart. His voice wrapped around my name like it belonged to him. I held out the folded bill. You forgot something, I said, loud enough that the court reporter's fingers paused for half a second over her keys. A few heads turned. His smile didn't flicker. Did I? Yes. I leaned closer, close enough that my words would reach him and him alone. This will serve you better than it will serve me. His eyes sharpened. Careful. I didn't look away. My dignity doesn't come with a price tag, especially not $1. For a heartbeat, the whole courtroom felt like it inhaled. I could hear the hum of the lights, the scratch of a pen, the faint rattle of Frankie's chains. The man's gaze moved from my face to the bill, then back. Slow, evaluating, like he was deciding whether I was brave or stupid. Then he took it. His fingers brushed mine, just a fraction of a second, but it sent a jolt through my palm and up my arm like an electric shock. Not warm, not gentle, possessive. Interesting, he murmured. Very interesting. He tucked the bill into the inside pocket of his tailored coat, as if it mattered now, as if it had become something more than an insult. And when he stepped back, giving me space, the air felt colder. I forced myself to turn away before my body betrayed me with a shiver. At the bench, Judge Raskin peered over her glasses, unimpressed by theatrics. Ms. Hart, Mr. Santoro, we ready? Yes, Your Honor, I said, voice steady even as my heart hammered. Behind me, I could feel him watching, not like a passerby, like a predator who'd just seen prey bite back. The ADA launched into the charges: possession with intent, alleged assault, obstruction. Frankie's case was thin. It always was in these rooms. Thin evidence, thick assumptions, and a system built to grind people down until they signed whatever paper would end the noise. I argued bail. I argued facts. I argued that Frankie had a job, a mother, a life that didn't deserve to be suspended because an officer's hunch needed validation. Judge Raskin set bail anyway. When I sat back down, Frankie's shoulders sagged. I'm sorry, I whispered. I'll file a motion. We'll fight. He nodded, eyes glossy with fear. And then, as the next case was called, the man in the gray eyes moved again, silent, effortless, until he was at the aisle beside me. You shouldn't waste your breath, he said. I didn't turn. Excuse me? On Santoro. He said the name like it tasted cheap. He's not walking. I gripped my folder hard enough to crease the paper. Who are you? A pause, like he enjoyed the question. Then softly, Alessandro Gallo. The name hit like a weight dropped in my stomach. It wasn't the kind of name you heard in court filings. It was the kind you heard in whispers, at precinct parties, in the back rooms of restaurants, in the cautious way senior attorneys warned junior ones to mind their mouths. The kind of name that didn't need a title because the city itself seemed to recognize it. I kept my face calm through sheer will. Mr. Gallo, I said, perfectly polite. I'm working. His mouth curved. So I see. I could feel his attention move over me the way a searchlight moves over a shoreline. Slow, thorough, impossible to hide from. You're angry, he observed. No. I filed papers into my bag with precise movements. I'm busy. He leaned closer. You should be angry. They pay you pennies, toss you scraps, and expect you to thank them for the privilege. I finally looked at him, because I needed him to see that I wasn't afraid. His eyes were pale, almost unsettling. Up close, they made everything else in the room feel blurry. I don't need your commentary, I said. I'm not offering commentary. His voice dipped, lower. I'm offering a deal. My stomach tightened. No. I hadn't even heard the deal. My body said no before my brain could entertain it. That made his smile deepen, like he appreciated the reflex. One conversation, he said. 10 minutes. Then you can say no again. I don't do backroom meetings. Good, he murmured. Neither do I. He straightened as a court officer approached, eyes flicking over Alessandro with a wariness that looked like practice. Alessandro offered the officer a look, cool, bored. The officer looked away first. I felt something cold settle under my ribs. People didn't look away from public defenders. They looked away from men who could make consequences appear. I said no, I repeated, quieter now, because this was starting to feel less like an insult and more like a test. Alessandro's gaze drifted to Frankie, who was being led back toward the holding area. Frankie Santoro is one of mine, said. My blood went still. That's not possible, I said, even though it was. Frankie didn't look like one of his. Frankie looked like a kid who'd been unlucky. Alessandro's voice remained calm. He's family to someone who matters, and he's about to be used as leverage. I swallowed. Leverage for what? For me. His eyes held mine. And you're standing between the system and a clean win. I clenched my jaw. If you're involved, my ethical obligations. Don't recite rules at me, counselor. His tone wasn't harsh, but it had an edge that made my pulse jump. You're already in this room with me. The question is, how you move from here. I forced a breath. What is your deal? He watched me for a long moment, then reached into his pocket again. Not the dollar, A card. Plain white. No logo. No fancy embossing. Just a name. Vincent. And a number. Call, Alessandro said. If you care about your client. I stared at the card, then at his face. He didn't look like he was bluffing. He looked like he'd already decided what would happen, and the world would simply follow. I hated that. I hated that the rational part of me, trained by years of broken systems and late-night research and judges who didn't care, recognized the danger in refusing. I took the card. Alessandro's gaze flicked to my fingers. Good girl. Heat flared in my chest, sharp and unwelcome. I'm not... He was already stepping away, moving back into the gallery like he hadn't just shifted the axis of my day. Before he disappeared into the crowd, he looked back once. One deal, Sienna, he said softly. That's all. Then he was gone, swallowed by bodies and noise and the courthouse rhythm. And I was left standing there, holding a plain white card like a loaded gun. I should have thrown it out. I should have gone back to my office, buried myself in motions and case. Law, pretended gray eyes weren't burned into my mind. Instead, I waited until the docket break, until Frankie was processed, until I'd said, I'll be back, to his mother with a confidence I didn't feel. Then I walked into the hallway, pulled my phone out with shaking hands, and dialed. It rang once, twice. Then a voice answered, smooth and professional. Vincent. This is Sienna Hart, I said, throat tight. Public defender. A pause. Yes, Ms. Hart. Mr. Gallo said you would call. I don't do deals with criminals, I said, because naming it made it feel safer. Vincent's voice didn't change. Mr. Gallo doesn't consider himself a criminal. He considers himself a businessman with complicated interests. That's cute. A faint sound that might have been amusement. Mr. Gallo would like to meet. Today, 3 p.m. No. Ms. Hart. Vincent's tone remained polite. Frankie Santoro will be arraigned again in 48 hours. The people will add charges. The bail will increase. His attorney of record is you. You will be blamed when his mother needs someone to hate. My grip tightened on my phone. What do you want? A deal, Vincent said. One. Then you walk away. I stared down the hallway at the courthouse exit, sunlight spilling in, people moving freely, the city waiting outside like it always had. Where? I heard myself ask. Vincent gave me an address in Tribeca that made my stomach drop. High-rise, private security, the kind of building where the lobby art was worth more than my student loans. Tell him I'm only coming because of my client, I said. Of course, Vincent replied. Mr. Gallo will appreciate your clarity. The call ended before I could change my mind. For the next 3 hours, I moved through my day like I was underwater. I met with clients. I argued motions. I sat across from a teenager who'd stolen food and insisted he deserved prison because he was tired of being hungry. But the whole time, there was a thread in my mind that kept pulling toward Tribeca, toward gray eyes, toward that dollar bill tucked inside a man's coat like a trophy. At 2:40 p.m., I stood outside the building and stared up. Glass and steel, discreet, expensive in a way that didn't need to announce itself. A doorman looked me over. Cheap blazer, worn heels, tote bag stuffed with legal files, and his expression flickered with judgment. Then I said, I'm here to see Mr. Gallo. The judgment evaporated. His posture shifted. Respect, mixed with something that looked like pity. Of course, Ms. Hart, he said quickly. 42nd floor, private elevator. Private elevator, because of course. Inside, the elevator was silent, the walls mirrored, the air faintly scented. I watched my reflection and didn't like what I saw. Not because I looked bad, though I looked exhausted, because I looked like someone about to step into a story she wouldn't control. The doors opened directly into a penthouse, floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan spread out like a glittering map. Artwork that made my throat tighten with recognition. Originals, not prints. Furniture that whispered old money. And standing by the windows as if he owned the whole skyline was Alessandro Gallo. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was wearing dark slacks and a white dress shirt with sleeves rolled up, exposing forearms that looked strong in a way that made my mind go quiet for half a second. A watch sat on his wrist, simple but expensive. He turned when I stepped out. Gray eyes, and something like satisfaction. "Sienna Hart," he said, voice warm, as if we were old friends. "You came." "I'm here for Frankie Santoro," I said immediately, because if I didn't set the boundary now, I feared I'd forget how. Alessandro smiled. "Of course you are." He walked toward me, slow, unhurried, like he knew I would hold my ground. I did, barely. He stopped a few feet away, close enough that I could smell him, cedar and smoke and something clean, close enough that the memory of his fingers brushing mine in court flashed hot against my skin. "You returned the dollar," he said softly. It was insulting. It was intentional. I blinked. "You did it on purpose." "Yes." His honesty landed like a slap. "I wanted to see what you would do when someone tried to buy your pride." Anger rose sharp in my chest. "You're sick." Alessandro's expression didn't change. "I'm thorough." "Why?" I demanded. "Why me?" His gaze flicked over me with unsettling precision. "Because you're the only person in that courtroom who didn't flinch when I looked at you." I hated that my stomach tightened at the compliment. "I flinched," I lied. His mouth curved like he knew I was lying. He gestured toward a sleek sofa. "Sit. I'm not here to relax." "No." His tone softened, but somehow it became more dangerous. "You're here to make a deal." I stayed standing. Alessandro watched me for a long moment, then nodded once as if he approved. "Good," he murmured. "Stay on your feet. It suits you." My cheeks warmed, infuriatingly. I forced my voice steady. "Frankie Santoro, what do you want?" Alessandro moved to a bar cart and poured himself a drink. Whiskey, amber catching the light. Then poured a second and held it out to me. I didn't take it. He set it down, untouched. "Frankie is a message," Alessandro said. "They picked him up because they can't pick me up." I crossed my arms. "Who is they?" "The people," he said, meaning the DA's office, the cops, the whole machine. "A task force, a detective who wants his name in the papers, a prosecutor who wants a promotion." My stomach clenched because I'd seen that hunger up close. "And you want me to—" "What?" I demanded. "Pull strings?" Alessandro's eyes held mine. "I want you to defend him like you would defend any client, without fear." I laughed, once, without humor. "Without fear? I'm standing in a stranger's penthouse being asked for favors by a man with a reputation that makes people look away." He stepped closer. The air shifted. "You're not afraid of me," he said quietly. My body betrayed me with a pulse of heat. "I should be." "Probably," he agreed, so casually it made my throat tighten. "But you're not." I forced a breath. "How do I know you're not the one using Frankie?" A slow smile. "Because if I wanted Frankie gone, he would already be gone." The ease with which he said it chilled me. "Jesus," I whispered. Alessandro watched me with a look that was almost gentle. "This is the world you live next to, counselor, whether you want to or not." I held his gaze, refusing to look away first. "What's the deal, Alessandro?" He paused. Then, almost softly, "One deal, one favor, and then you walk away." "What favor?" He reached into a folder on the coffee table, thick, neatly labeled, and slid it toward me. My name was on it. Sienna Hart. My blood went cold. I didn't touch it. "You investigated me." "I investigate everyone I'm about to trust," he said simply. "Trust?" My voice cracked. "You don't trust anyone." A flicker of amusement. "That's true." I stared at the folder like it might bite. Alessandro leaned forward slightly. You went to Columbia, top of your class. You interned with the DA before you switched sides. My stomach tightened because I hadn't told anyone in my office about the DA internship. It was a footnote I avoided. You have $213,000 in student loans, he continued. You send money to your mother every month. You're covering your younger sister's tuition because your father decided disappearing was easier than parenting. Heat flooded my face, rage, humiliation, and something worse. Stop, I snapped. Alessandro's gaze didn't move. You work 80 hours a week and still feel guilty when you sleep. You pretend you don't want help because you're afraid help will come with strings. My throat closed. He tilted his head. Am I wrong? I hated him. I hated how accurate he was. I hated how my body felt like it was buzzing, like it recognized danger and wanted to run toward it anyway. What do you want? I repeated, voice quieter now, because the room felt like it belonged to him, and I was the only object in it that didn't. Alessandro's eyes darkened, just slightly. I want your mind. My stomach flipped. Excuse me? Your legal mind, he clarified, but his gaze lingered in a way that made the words feel like a lie. I'm building something legitimate, something clean. I laughed again. You're a mafia boss. Alessandro's jaw tightened. That's what people call me when they're afraid to say my name. Then say it, I challenged, because I was angry enough to be reckless. Say what you are. A beat of silence. Then quietly. I'm a man who inherited an empire built on violence, and I'm trying to build something else before it devours what's left of me. The honesty should have felt like a trick. Instead, it landed in my chest like a stone. And you want me to be your lawyer, I said. Not permanently, he said. One deal, one case. I narrowed my eyes. Frankie. Alessandro nodded. Frankie is step 1. And step 2? He stepped closer again, slow, inevitable. You, he said. The word hit me like a current. I forced my voice steady. I'm not for sale. Alessandro's gaze flicked down to my mouth, then back to my eyes. I know. His voice softened. That's why you're here. I swallowed, throat tight. You said one deal. His smile returned, sharp and dangerous. Yes. He moved past me then, circling like he owned the space between us, and I hated that my body tracked him. Here's the deal, he said. You defend Frankie. You get him out. Clean. That's my job. No. Alessandro's tone sharpened. You do it knowing that if you win, you will make enemies. You will be watched. They will try to break you. Cold settled in my stomach. Why would I do that? Because you don't like losing. His gaze cut into me. And because you care. I clenched my jaw. And what do I get? Alessandro's smile faded. You get your sister's tuition paid, he said calmly. My breath caught. No. You get your mother's mortgage covered, he continued, as if I hadn't spoken. I said no. My voice rose. And you get Frankie home, Alessandro finished, eyes steady. Because he doesn't deserve to be crushed for someone else's war. My hands clenched at my sides. You don't get to buy my family. I'm not buying, he said softly. I'm offering. It's the same. Alessandro's gaze hardened. No, buying would mean you don't have a choice. He stepped closer until he was within arm's reach. The air felt too thick. You always have a choice, he murmured. You just don't always like the options. My heart slammed against my ribs. I lifted my chin. If I take your money, I'm compromised. If you don't, he said quietly, they will use Frankie to get to me, and your system will let them. He wasn't wrong. That was the worst part. I looked away first, because the view of the city felt safer than his eyes. I'll defend Frankie, I said, voice tight, because he's my client. Alessandro's voice softened. Good. But I don't take your money. A pause. Then he chuckled, low and pleased. Stubborn. I'm serious. I know, he murmured. That's why you're interesting. I turned back, anger flaring. Stop saying that like I'm entertainment. Alessandro's gaze sharpened, something predatory flickering. You're not entertainment. You're rare. The word should have been flattering. It felt like a claim. I forced myself to breathe. So what's your one deal beyond Frankie? Alessandro reached into his pocket, pulled out the crisp dollar bill, and held it up between us. Keep it, he said. I blinked. What? Take it, he repeated. Not as money, as a reminder. Of what? I demanded. His gray eyes held mine. Of the moment you told me no. My throat tightened. He extended the bill again. My pride screamed not to touch it. My curiosity, my stupid, dangerous curiosity, reached out. I took it. The moment my fingers closed, around the paper, Alessandro's hand covered mine briefly, warm, firm, then released as if he hadn't meant to. But I felt it anyway, in my skin, in my pulse. One deal, he said softly. I ask you for one thing. What? I whispered. He smiled, slow and deadly. When this is over, when Frankie is free, you give me one honest conversation about what you want. My chest tightened. That has nothing to do with law. Alessandro's gaze dipped to my mouth again. It has everything to do with you. I should have left right then. I should have turned and run back to my cramped office with its peeling paint and ringing phones and problems I understood. Instead, I stood there with a dollar bill in my hand and gray eyes burning into me, and I felt the ground shift under my life. Fine, I said, because the word came out before I could stop it. One conversation. Alessandro's smile widened. Good, he murmured. Now, let's save your client. The next 48 hours were a blur of paper cuts, late-night research, and the kind of adrenaline that made my hands steady even when my mind screamed. I filed motions. I requested discovery. I hunted down body cam footage that mysteriously malfunctioned. I called Frankie's mother and promised things I wasn't sure I could deliver. And all the while, I felt eyes on me. Not Alessandro's. Other eyes. In the courthouse hallway, a detective I'd never seen before stared a beat too long. A colleague pulled me aside and whispered, Be careful. Santoro's case is getting flagged. Flagged meant someone higher up cared, and someone higher up caring meant pressure. On the morning of Frankie's next appearance, I walked into court with my file folder clutched like armor. Frankie was brought in, wrists cuffed, expression tight. He leaned toward me as we sat. They say I'm dead, he whispered. I kept my face calm. They say a lot of things, he swallowed. They said Gallo's involved. They said you're his lawyer now. My stomach tightened. I'm your lawyer. Frankie's eyes searched mine, desperate. Is he gonna kill me if I mess this up? I turned my head slightly, scanning the room. And there, in the back row, half in shadow, was Alessandro. He wasn't sitting like he belonged in court. He was sitting like court belonged to him. His gaze met mine. A small nod. Not threatening, reassuring. It made my chest tighten anyway. No, I told Frankie, voice low. He's not going to kill you. Frankie didn't look convinced. Neither was I. The ADA, Melissa Klein, strode in like she owned the air, heels sharp against the tile. She was good, hungry, the kind of prosecutor who believed she was saving the world one conviction at a time. She smiled at me with all teeth. Sienna, she said lightly. Big case. Good morning, I replied, neutral. Her gaze flicked, over my shoulder, toward the gallery. For a fraction of a second, something tightened around her eyes. She'd seen him. Everyone saw him. And everyone understood what it meant. She leaned closer, voice lowering. You should recuse yourself. My stomach dropped. Excuse me? You're compromised, she said softly, as if she was doing me a favor. This case has implications. What implications? I demanded. Melissa's smile sharpened. You tell me. My pulse kicked. I forced myself to breathe. If you have an ethical complaint, file it. Melissa's gaze held mine, then drifted toward the judge's bench. You're walking into something bigger than you, she murmured. And the system doesn't forgive people who get in the way. Then she straightened and moved toward her table, leaving Cold behind her. I felt Alessandro's attention like a brand. When Frankie's case was called, I stood. The judge looked tired. The bailiff looked bored. And then I started talking. I argued the evidence. I argued the unlawful stop. I argued the missing footage. I argued the inconsistent statements. The ADA objected. I pushed. The judge listened. And when the judge finally sighed and said, "Bail is modified," Frankie's shoulders sagged with relief so intense it almost looked like pain. Not released, yet, but lower. Manageable. Possible. I sat back down, hands steady, heart racing. Frankie leaned toward me, voice shaking. Thank you. I nodded, jaw tight. In the gallery, Alessandro rose. He didn't clap, didn't smile. He simply looked at me like he'd expected nothing less. After court, as Frankie was led away, Alessandro appeared at my side like he'd been waiting for the exact second my guard slipped. That was good, he murmured. I did my job, I snapped. His eyes glinted. Yes, you did. He leaned closer, voice low enough that only I could hear. Now they'll come, harder. My spine chilled. They? Alessandro's expression was calm, but something sharp lived beneath it. The task force, the detective, the prosecutor who wants my head. My stomach twisted. This isn't my war. Alessandro's gaze held mine. It is now, because you stepped onto the field. I hated that my body reacted to his proximity. That heat curled low in my belly like a traitor. I want Frankie safe, I said tightly. That's it. Alessandro's smile was slow. So do I. He started to move away, then paused. And Sienna, he added, voice softer. You looked beautiful when you told that judge no. My cheeks warmed. I should have ignored it. Instead, I heard myself say, Stop. Alessandro turned back, eyebrow lifting. You don't get to. I searched for the words, anger and confusion tangling. You don't get to talk to me like that. His gaze darkened, just slightly. Like what? Like, I swallowed. Like I'm yours. A beat of silence. Then he smiled. Not amused, not teasing. Something else. Not yours, he murmured. Mine would imply ownership. My pulse jumped. I don't own you, he continued, voice low. But I want you. The bluntness stole the air from my lungs. I stared at him, furious and stunned, and far too aware of how alive I suddenly felt. Alessandro watched me like he was waiting to see if I'd run. I forced myself to breathe. You don't know me. I know enough, he said. Then he stepped back, creating distance as if he'd never said anything at all. I'll keep my word, he added, suddenly professional. Your family won't be touched by this. My stomach tightened. I never agreed to that. Alessandro's gaze sharpened. You didn't have to. The way he said it made my skin prickle. He turned and walked away, his coat moving like shadow, leaving me in the courthouse hallway with my heart beating too fast and my mind screaming that this was a mistake. That night, I didn't go home right away. I went to my office, sat at my desk under flickering fluorescent lights, and stared at Frankie's file until my eyes burned. I told myself I was safe. I told myself I'd handled worse. Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number. My stomach dropped. I answered anyway. Hart, I said. A familiar voice, smooth. Ms. Hart. Vincent. Yes. A pause. Mr. Gallo would like to see you. It's 10 p.m. Mr. Gallo keeps hours the city can't afford, Vincent replied. He asked me to remind you of your deal. I clenched my jaw. Frankie isn't free. Not yet, Vincent agreed. But the next step requires coordination. I'm not part of his operation. Vincent's tone remained polite. Then consider this legal consultation. Mr. Gallo has information relevant to your case. I closed my eyes. This is how it starts, I thought. Not with a gun to your head, with a phone call you shouldn't answer. Where? I said quietly. Vincent gave me an address. Not the penthouse this time. A restaurant. Private room. 11, Vincent said. You will be met at the back entrance. The smart choice was to refuse. The smart choice was to call my supervisor and request reassignment. The smart choice was to run. But my life hadn't been built on smart choices. It had been built on survival. And something inside me, a stubborn, furious part, wanted to look Alessandro Gallo in the eyes again and prove I could stand in the same room with him without bending. So I went. The restaurant was the kind of place I could never afford. Low lighting, soft jazz, tables spaced far enough apart that privacy was built into the architecture. A hostess led me down a hallway to a door guarded by a man in a suit. He looked me over, then stepped aside without a word. Inside, Alessandro sat alone at a table with 2 glasses of wine, sleeves rolled up, the collar of his shirt open just enough to reveal a hint of olive skin. He looked up when I entered, and the room felt like it narrowed until it contained only him and me. Sienna, he said softly. You came. I kept my face neutral. Vincent said you had information. Alessandro gestured to the chair across from him. Sit. I sat, because refusing would have been childish, and because the chair gave me something to do with my hands. Alessandro studied me, gaze slow and thorough, like he was reading a document only he could see. You're exhausted, he observed. I work. He smiled faintly. Yes, you do. He pushed a folder toward me, thinner than the one with my life inside it. This one had Frankie's name. Read, he said. I opened it. Inside were photos, transcripts, notes, surveillance reports. My throat tightened as I realized what I was looking at. Where did you get this? I demanded. Alessandro's gaze didn't flicker. I have ways. This is illegal. Probably, he admitted calmly. I stared at him. You're handing me evidence that could blow up my case and you're saying probably? Alessandro leaned back slightly, watching me like he enjoyed my outrage. You want Frankie out, he said. You want him alive. You want him free. Yes. Then you use whatever tools you have, Alessandro replied, including me. My hands clenched around the folder. This isn't admissible. It points you to what is, he said smoothly. A witness who will talk. A camera the police forgot to pull. A chain of custody problem they're hiding. My stomach twisted. Why are you helping? I demanded. If Frankie is yours, why not just handle it? Alessandro's eyes darkened. Because if I handle it my way, people die. And Frankie doesn't need more blood on his life. The honesty made my chest tighten. You said you were trying to build something else, I said quietly. Alessandro's gaze held mine. I am. He leaned forward a fraction, voice lowering. But I can't do it alone. Something in his tone made my pulse jump. I forced myself to keep my voice steady. So you want me to be your conscience? Alessandro's mouth curved. No. He reached across the table, not to touch me, not yet, just to slide the wineglass closer. You're not my conscience, he said softly. You're my test. I blinked. That's not better. Alessandro smiled, slow and dangerous. No, it's worse. Heat curled in my chest, sharp and unwelcome. He watched my reaction with a calm that made me feel like prey. I don't like games, I said. Alessandro's gaze dipped to my mouth for half a second. Then don't play. I swallowed, throat tight. What do you want, Alessandro? Pause. Then softly. One deal. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the dollar bill again. My stomach tightened. He placed it on the table between us, not as an insult this time, as a marker. One deal, he repeated. You get Frankie out, you use the information, you win. And then? Alessandro's gaze held mine. Then you give me that honest conversation, and you decide if you walk away or if you step closer. My pulse hammered. This is inappropriate, I whispered. Yes, he agreed, voice gentle in the most dangerous way. And you feel it anyway. I hated him. I hated how right he was. I stared at the bill, at the crisp edges catching the low light, and felt my life splitting into before and after. I forced myself to pick up the folder and stand. I'm taking this, I said. For Frankie. Alessandro's gaze tracked me. Good. And the conversation, my voice caught, happens when Frankie is free. Alessandro rose too, moving closer until he was within arm's reach. He didn't touch me, but his presence did. Agreed, he murmured. I turned to leave, because staying felt like leaning over a cliff and testing gravity. As I reached the door, Alessandro's voice stopped me. Sienna. I paused, hand on the handle. His tone was softer now, almost careful. You did the right thing in court, he said, returning the dollar. I didn't turn. It was a reflex. Alessandro's voice lowered. No, it was a line. A beat. Then, almost a whisper. Thank you. The words hit me harder than any insult. I left the room with my heart in my throat, the folder tucked under my arm, and the dollar bill still on the table between us like a promise. Over the next week, the case exploded. I found the camera Alessandro's notes had hinted at, a bodega across the street with a security system the cops had conveniently missed. The footage showed Frankie being grabbed first, shoved against a wall, his hands up. The assault was self-defense. I found a witness, an EMT, who'd treated one of the officers and noted bruises that didn't match the report. I filed motions. I subpoenaed records. I made the ADA look like she was hiding something. Melissa Klein's smile disappeared. She started showing up with supervisors. The judge's patience thinned. And the detective in the hallway, the one I'd noticed before, started watching me like he was memorizing my routine. One night, as I left my office late, I felt it, that prickle on the back of my neck. I turned. A man stood near the end of the block, half hidden by the shadow of a lamppost. Not Vincent, not a suit. This one wore a cheap hoodie and a look that made my stomach drop. He lifted his phone as if taking a picture. Then he walked away. Cold slid under my ribs. I hurried to the subway, keeping my head down, trying not to let fear turn into panic. Halfway down the stairs, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. My heart jumped. I answered. Hello? Alessandro's voice, low and calm. Stop. I froze on the stairwell. What? I whispered. Don't go underground, he said. No greeting, no pretense. Turn around and walk back up. My pulse spiked. Why? Because you're being followed, Alessandro said, as casually as if he were commenting on the weather. Ice flooded my veins. I forced myself to keep breathing. How do you? I see what's mine, he said softly. Heat and anger flared. I'm not yours. A pause. Then his voice, quieter. Not yet. My breath caught. Turn around, he repeated, tone sharpening. Now. My body moved before my mind could argue. I climbed back up the stairs, heart hammering. Outside, the street felt too open, too bright, too full of places someone could hide. "Where are you?" I whispered. "In a car," Alessandro replied. "Look to your left." I turned. A black sedan idled at the curb. The back door opened, and Alessandro sat inside, watching me through the dark. His gaze cut into me like a blade. "Get in," he said. It wasn't a question. Every rational part of me screamed no. Every survival instinct screamed yes. So I got in. The door shut behind me with a soft, final click. The car smelled like leather and him. Alessandro didn't touch me. He didn't even move. He just looked at me with gray eyes that made my skin feel too tight. "You're stubborn," he murmured. "Someone was following me," I whispered. "Who?" Alessandro's jaw clenched. "A task force contractor. Someone who thinks fear will make you fold." My throat tightened. "They're threatening me." Alessandro's gaze hardened. "They're trying." "And you knew?" "Yes." "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Alessandro's eyes flicked over my face, something dark living beneath his calm. "Because you would have tried to handle it alone." I swallowed. He wasn't wrong. His voice lowered. "You don't have to." The softness in his tone was more dangerous than any threat. I forced myself to breathe. "Take me home." Alessandro's gaze held mine. "Where is home?" My chest tightened at the question. "My apartment," I said, sharper than necessary. Alessandro leaned back slightly, as if he'd expected the deflection. "Fine," he murmured. "But first, you listen." I stared at him, pulse racing. Alessandro's voice stayed calm. "They will try to scare you. They will try to discredit you. They will try to turn your own office against you." My stomach twisted. "How do you know?" Alessandro's eyes went colder. "Because I've done it." The admission hit hard. "You've ruined people," I whispered. "Yes," he said simply. "And I'm telling you this because I don't want them to ruin you." My throat tightened. "Why do you care?" A pause. Then softly Alessandro said, "Because when you returned that $1, you reminded me what it feels like to be told no." The words should have sounded manipulative. They didn't. They sounded honest. My voice cracked. "That's not enough." Alessandro's gaze held mine, steady. "It's not the only reason." Heat crawled up my neck. The car was too small. His presence too big. "Don't," I whispered. Alessandro's mouth curved, faint. "Don't what?" "Don't make this about us," I said, even though the tremor in my voice betrayed me. "This is about my client." Alessandro's eyes softened, just slightly. "Everything becomes about us when you're in my world." My pulse jumped. I hated the way my body reacted, how it felt like it recognized the danger and wanted it anyway. Alessandro's voice lowered. "You're shaking." I looked down. My hands were trembling, in my lap. I clenched them into fists, furious at myself. "Adrenaline," I lied. Alessandro's gaze stayed on me. "You're brave," he murmured, "but you're not invincible." I swallowed hard. "Take me home," I repeated. Alessandro nodded once, then spoke to the driver in Italian, smooth, sharp, and the car pulled away. As we moved through the city, I stared out the window, trying to regain control of my breathing. I felt Alessandro watching me, silent. When we reached my building, the car stopped. Alessandro didn't move to open the door. He just spoke, quiet and firm. "Tomorrow," he said, "you go to court. You win. You get Frankie out." I turned to him. "And then?" Alessandro's gray eyes locked onto mine. "Then we talk." My throat tightened. "Alessandro." He leaned closer, close enough that my breath hitched. His voice dropped to a whisper. "One deal, Sienna." Then he reached into his pocket, pulled out the $1, bill, and held it out to me. I stared at it. "What?" I whispered. He smiled, slow and dangerous. "Keep it this time." I took it, because refusing felt like surrendering to fear. Alessandro's fingers brushed mine again, brief, electric, and then he released me. "Go," he murmured. I got out of the car, legs unsteady, and walked toward my building with the dollar bill clenched in my hand like a talisman. I didn't look back, but I felt his gaze on me until the door shut behind me. That night, sleep didn't come. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the dollar bill on my nightstand, and tried to convince myself I wasn't in trouble. Not legal trouble, not moral trouble. The other kind. The kind that sneaks into your bloodstream and starts rewiring you. The next day in court, Melissa Klein looked like she hadn't slept either. Her supervisor sat beside her, expression flat. The detective stood in the back, arms crossed, and Alessandro was there again. In the gallery, still as stone. When Frankie's case was called, I stood, and I fought like my life depended on it, because in a way, it did. I played the bodega footage. I introduced the EMT notes. I cross-examined the officer on his malfunctioning body cam until his face flushed and his answers fell apart. The judge's expression hardened. Melissa objected, voice tight. I pushed. The judge listened. And then, finally, Judge Raskin sighed, long, weary, and said, "Motion granted. Charges reduced. Bail is set to ROR." Released on his own recognizance. Frankie's breath left him like a sob. His mother cried out from the back row. Frankie looked at me like I'd just handed him back his life. I sat down slowly, hands still steady, heart pounding. Alessandro's gaze met mine. A small nod. Approval. As Frankie was let out, not in shackles this time, he stopped beside Alessandro's row, eyes wide. Alessandro didn't speak to him, didn't touch him. He simply looked at Frankie. And Frankie lowered his head in a gesture that wasn't respect. It was allegiance. Cold slid through me. After court, in the hallway, Melissa Klein caught my arm. "Congratulations," she said, voice sweet. "You won." "Thank you," I said, pulling free. Melissa's eyes sharpened. "Be careful, Sienna." I held her gaze. "Are you threatening me?" Melissa smiled. "No, I'm warning you. You just stepped into a war you don't understand." Then she walked away. My stomach twisted. I turned, and Alessandro was there, waiting near the courthouse exit like he'd known exactly where I would go. He offered me his arm like I was some delicate thing that needed escorting. I ignored it. "We're done," I said, voice tight. "Frankie is free. Deal fulfilled." Alessandro's gaze held mine. "Yes." "And I'm walking away," I added, because I needed to say it out loud. A slow smile. "You can try." Anger flared. "Don't!" Alessandro stepped closer, voice dropping. "One conversation, Sienna." My chest tightened. That wasn't part of Frankie's deal. "It was," he murmured. "You agreed." I clenched my jaw. He watched me, calm, waiting. The street outside was loud, full of people who had no idea what it meant to be standing this close to Alessandro Gallo. I forced a breath. "Fine. One conversation." Alessandro's mouth curved. "Good." "Where?" I demanded. He leaned closer, voice soft against my ear. "Somewhere you can't run." Heat flared in my chest, sharp and furious. "I'm not afraid of you," I said. Alessandro's smile deepened, pleased. "That's the problem." He gestured toward a black car waiting at the curb. My stomach dropped. "No." Alessandro's gaze sharpened. "Sienna." The way he said my name felt like a hand closing around my throat, gentle but certain. I stared at him, heart racing, and realized this wasn't about power, not entirely. This was about something worse. Want, curiosity, The part of me that had been starved for years and suddenly smelled food. I hated him for that. I hated myself more. 10 minutes, I said, voice tight. That's all. Alessandro's smile was slow. We both know you're lying. I got in anyway. The car pulled away. The city blurred outside the window, and I felt, with sick certainty, that I'd just crossed a line I wouldn't be able to uncross. Alessandro didn't speak for a long moment. He just watched me with that unsettling, pale gaze, as if he was letting me feel the weight of my choice. Finally, he said, "Tell me what you want." I laughed, bitter. "You first." Alessandro's mouth curved. "Fair." He leaned back slightly, hands relaxed, posture casual in a way that should have been comforting, but wasn't. "I want to build a legitimate operation," he said calmly. "Clean money. Clean businesses. Something that can survive when the blood dries." My stomach twisted. "And you think I can help you?" Alessandro's gaze held mine. "I know you can." "I'm a public defender." "You're a strategist," he corrected. "You know how systems bend. You know where they break. You know how to protect people with nothing but words." My throat tightened. "Words don't protect people from bullets." Alessandro's gaze darkened. "No." He leaned forward slightly, voice lowering. "I do." The bluntness stole my breath. "I want a deal," I said quickly, needing to keep this in law. "If you're asking me to work for you—" "I'm not," he interrupted smoothly. "Not like that." "Then what are you asking?" Alessandro's eyes stayed on mine. "I'm asking you to advise me, quietly, legally." "That's still working for you?" "Yes," he said simply. My stomach clenched. "I can't. Ethics." Alessandro's gaze sharpened. "You can't because you don't trust yourself around me." Heat climbed my neck. "I don't trust you," I snapped. Alessandro smiled faintly. "That too." I forced myself to breathe. "What's the deal, Alessandro?" A pause. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded document. He held it out. I took it, suspicious. It was a contract. Typed, formal, legal language. My name at the top. Consulting agreement. Limited term. Clear compensation. Clear scope. And, buried in the clauses, a line that made my breath catch. Termination without penalty, at any time at Ms. Hart's sole discretion. My throat tightened. He'd built me an escape route. "Why?" I whispered, looking up. Alessandro's gaze held mine, steady. "Because you demanded control." My pulse hammered. "I didn't demand anything," I said. Alessandro's mouth curved. "You will." I swallowed hard. "This is insane." "Yes," he agreed, like insanity was a language he spoke fluently. "And the compensation—" I flipped the page and nearly choked. It was more money than I made in a year. My stomach twisted with anger. "This is buying." Alessandro's gaze stayed calm. "No, this is valuing." "Same thing." He leaned closer, voice low. "Tell me your number, Sienna. Tell me what it costs to keep you safe and free and unowned. I will pay it, and I will not ask for anything in return but your mind." My heart slammed. The car felt too small again. "Why me?" I whispered. "Because it haunted me." Alessandro's expression softened, just slightly. "Because you returned the dollar," he said. "Because you didn't flinch. Because you didn't beg. Because you looked at me like I was just a man." My throat tightened. "And because," he added, voice dropping, "I can't afford to want you without a reason." The words hit like a punch. My breath caught. I stared at him. Anger and heat and fear tangled inside me. "This is manipulation," I whispered. Alessandro's gaze held mine. "Yes." The honesty stunned me. "And yet," he murmured, "you're still here." I hated him. I hated that he was right. I looked down at the contract again, at the clause that let me walk away. He'd given me control, because he wanted me to choose. That should have felt safer. It didn't. It felt like a trap built out of respect. "What's the catch?" I demanded. Alessandro's mouth curved. "The catch is you'll see things." My stomach tightened. "What things?" "The world behind the curtains," he said softly. "And once you see it, you won't be able to unsee it." My throat closed. I thought of Frankie lowering his head in allegiance. I thought of the detective watching me. I thought of Melissa's warning. I thought of the way my body reacted to Alessandro's proximity, like it was starving. "I can't," I said, but the words lacked conviction. Alessandro watched me with a calm that felt like inevitability. "Then say no," he murmured. He leaned back, giving me space. "Say no, Sienna, and I'll let you walk." I stared at him, at the scar through his eyebrow, at the pale eyes, at the way his hands looked, capable, controlled, like they could cradle something gently or break it without effort. I thought about my sister's tuition, my mother's mortgage, my own exhaustion. I thought about the system that would happily grind me down until I stopped fighting, and I thought about how alive I felt when I'd handed him that dollar back. "I have conditions," I heard myself say. Alessandro's smile returned, slow and pleased. "Of course you do." "Full transparency," I said quickly, voice tightening. "If you're doing anything illegal, I need to know." Alessandro's gaze sharpened. "That's a dangerous condition." "I don't care." A pause. Then he nodded once. "Agreed." "And you don't contact my family," I continued. "Ever. Not with money, not with threats, not with gifts." Alessandro's eyes held mine. "Agreed." "And I keep my job," I said. "I don't become your in-house lawyer. This is limited, specific." Alessandro's mouth curved. "Agreed." "And," my voice caught, because this one felt too personal, "you don't touch me without permission." A beat of silence. Something flickered in his eyes. Approval, maybe, or respect. Then he nodded again. "Agreed." My heart pounded. He extended his hand, not rushed, not demanding, an invitation. I stared at his hand, at the signet ring on his pinky, at the neat nails, at the quiet power in the gesture. I should have refused. Instead, I placed my hand in his. His fingers closed around mine, warm, firm, and a current shot up my arms so intense it stole my breath. His thumb brushed my knuckles, lingering a fraction too long to be purely professional. "Deal," he murmured. My voice came out rough. "Deal." Alessandro released me. The moment snapped like a thread. He picked up a phone, spoke in Italian, then looked back at me. "We're going to my office," he said. "You'll see the file." "What file?" His gray eyes turned colder. "The one they're building on you." My blood went still. "On me," I whispered. Alessandro's gaze held mine. "Yes, Sienna." The city outside blurred, and for the first time since the courthouse, fear hit me clean and sharp. Because I finally understood something I'd been trying not to. Frankie Santoro had never been the real target. I was. The car didn't take me to a penthouse. It took me to a building that didn't want to be noticed. An old financial services tower just off Broadway, with a lobby so clean it looked sterile, marble so pale it could have been bone. No signage, no brass nameplate, only a security desk, staffed by men who didn't glance at screens unless they already knew what they were going to see. Alessandro's driver didn't speak. He didn't have to. My pulse kept a steady, furious rhythm as we moved through a private entrance, up a service elevator that smelled faintly of ozone and expensive soap, and into a hallway carpeted so thick it swallowed the sound of my heels. The silence felt intentional, like a warning. A door opened without a knock. not swung, released. Vincent stepped aside with that same smooth, professional stillness he always wore, like a tailored suit over something sharp. "This way, Ms. Hart." I didn't correct him. I didn't give him the satisfaction of seeing me bristle. I walked in. Alessandro's office wasn't romantic. It wasn't candlelit. It wasn't a Tribeca fantasy meant to seduce me into thinking danger could be curated. It was a war room pretending to be corporate. A long table, 2 walls of screens, dark for now. Shelves, lined with binders that had nothing to do with aesthetics. A map of Manhattan pinned behind glass, dotted with small, precise markers. The windows were there, but the view felt secondary, like the city existed outside his reach only as a courtesy. He stood at the far end of the table with his sleeves rolled up, white shirt stark against the dark wood, gray eyes pale as winter glass. There was no smile, only attention. "Sit," he said. I stayed standing. "You said you had a file," I replied. My voice sounded steadier than I felt, which was the only reason I didn't hate myself for the tremor in my hands. "Show me." Alessandro's gaze flicked once, down to my hands, then back up, as if taking inventory of what the fear was doing to me. Then he reached to the table and slid a thick folder across the polished surface. The motion was calm, controlled. The kind of calm that made you understand he didn't get this way by being lucky. The folder stopped directly in front of me. My name stared up in black type. Sienna Hart. My stomach turned cold, the same way it had when he'd first put my life in a folder like a possession he could set down and pick up whenever he wanted. I didn't touch it at first. I looked at him. "This is your idea of transparency?" I asked. "You keeping a file on me and now, what, sharing it like it's a gift?" Alessandro's expression didn't shift. "That file is not mine." The sentence landed like a slap. I stared. "What?" He stepped closer, not into my space, not touching, but close enough that his presence thickened the air. "It's theirs," he said, "and they are not subtle about it." I dragged my nails lightly along the folder's edge before opening it, like I could soften what I was about to see by hesitating. Inside were photographs, more than I expected. Me leaving the courthouse, me on my phone outside the subway entrance, me walking into that restaurant's back hallway, me stepping out of the black sedan, not grainy, not lucky snapshots, surveillance. Notes were clipped beside the photos, times, locations, names. Hart met with Gallo associate Vincent at 22:07 hours. Hart observed entering Gallo vehicle at 18:43 hours. Hart maintained contact with Gallo, possible compromise. My throat tightened. "This is illegal?" Alessandro supplied, almost bored. "Maybe. It depends who is writing the rules that day." I flipped the page and felt my pulse stumble. A printed bank record. My account number redacted except for the last 4 digits I knew by heart. A deposit entry highlighted in yellow. $10,000. My vision sharpened so hard it hurt. "That's not mine," I said, too fast, too loud. "It's in your name," Alessandro replied. "It's fabricated," I snapped. "It's planted." Alessandro's eyes narrowed. "Yes." The agreement should have relieved me. Instead, it made my stomach drop, further, because it meant the people with badges and subpoenas weren't merely watching me. They were building a story. And stories, when the system wanted them, became verdicts. I forced myself to breathe and turned the page. There it was, an anonymous ethics complaint, printed on letterhead that made my skin crawl. Allegations of improper contact with a known organized crime figure. Allegations of accepting illicit compensation. Allegations of witness tampering relating to People versus Santoro. At the bottom, a line that made my mouth go dry. Referral pending to the District Attorney's Public Integrity Bureau. My hands went cold around the folder. "They're going to arrest me," I whispered, more to myself than to him. Alessandro didn't correct me. That silence was an answer. I lifted my gaze. Who? A pause. Then he said it like he was naming weather. Detective Rowan Kells. The name didn't ring in my mind until it did. Until I saw, in memory, the man in the hallway with the posture of someone who wanted the world to notice him, the stare that lingered, the hunger under it. And Melissa? I asked, because my brain needed a shape for betrayal. Alessandro's eyes cooled. Klein is not the architect. She's an instrument. I swallowed. You're sure? I don't do guesses, he said, voice low. I do certainty. My fingers tightened on the folder. Why are they doing this? Alessandro watched me for a beat, then reached into his pocket. I expected a phone, a gun, a threat. He pulled out the dollar bill, the same crisp paper that had started this, warm when it hit my pad in court like a private joke and a challenge. He didn't toss it this time. He placed it on the table between us with almost reverent precision. They can't buy you, he said, so they're going to sell you. My throat tightened. Sell me to who? To the public, he replied. To your office, to a judge, to a jury, to anyone who needs to believe this city is clean as long as the right people bleed. I felt something sharp rise behind my ribs, rage so clean it almost felt like clarity. I didn't take money, I said. I didn't tamper with anything. I know, Alessandro cut in, and something dangerous moved behind his eyes. But the system doesn't require truth. It requires a narrative that holds long enough to do damage. I stared at the highlighted $10,000 like it might burn through the paper. Why show me this? I demanded. If you're as powerful as everyone acts like you are, if you can make people look away in a courtroom, why not just make this disappear? Alessandro's jaw flexed once. I can, he said quietly. The words sent a chill through me. But you won't, I guessed, because I knew him just enough now to understand what he wanted from me wasn't obedience. It was consent. His gaze held mine. Not without your permission. A beat. I forced my voice steady. So what do you want? Alessandro's attention dipped, briefly, to the dollar bill, then back to me. I want you alive, he said, and unbroken. My stomach twisted at the word. Unbroken. Like he'd already decided the breaking was inevitable. And, he added slower, I want you to choose how you survive this. My throat tightened. You're asking me to trust you. I'm telling you you don't have time to hate me, he replied. Hate me later. Vincent's presence materialized near the door like a shadow given a suit. Mr. Gallo, he said softly. They've scheduled the interview. My pulse spiked. What interview? Alessandro's eyes didn't leave mine. Public integrity is inviting you to a conversation. Invite, like a knife with a ribbon. When? I asked. Vincent answered. An hour. My mouth went dry. They're moving. Fast. Yes, Alessandro said. Because they think you're alone. I looked down at the folder, at my name, at the lies arranged so neatly they looked official. Then I looked at Alessandro. I'm not wearing a wire, I said immediately, because I could already hear the pressure they'd apply. I'm not helping them build a case against you to save myself. A faint flicker, approval maybe, moved through his eyes. Good, he murmured. Because if you do, I will know. The calm in his voice should have been comforting. It wasn't. Don't threaten me, I said. I'm not, he replied. I'm being honest. I forced myself to inhale. What's the plan? Alessandro's gaze sharpened like a blade being drawn. You go to that interview. My stomach dropped. Absolutely not. He stepped closer, close enough that the air felt charged, but he didn't touch me. He'd agreed not to. You don't get to hide, he said. Not from them, not from this. I lifted my chin. You don't get to order me. Something like a smile ghosted his mouth. Brief. Dangerous. And yet, he murmured, you're still standing here asking for a plan. Rage flared. Because my life is on that table. Alessandro's gaze dipped to the folder, then back. So is mine. I stared at him. Then tell me what you're really doing. Silence. Then quietly. I'm giving you the option I never had. The honesty hit me harder than it should have. I didn't have room for sympathy, not for him, not for a man who could make people disappear with a phone call, but I had room for understanding, and understanding was a weapon. Fine, I said, voice tight. I go. Alessandro didn't blink. Good. And I control the conversation, I added. Not you, not Vincent, not your men. His eyes darkened with something that looked like respect. You will, he said. That's why you'll win. I swallowed hard. Win what? Alessandro's voice dropped. Your name. My stomach clenched, because he'd just admitted what I'd been trying not to. This wasn't only about a case, it was about identity. They weren't just trying to arrest me. They were trying to turn me into a cautionary tale. Another naive defender who got too close to the wrong man and paid for it. I clenched my hands. What do you have? Alessandro turned his head slightly. Vincent stepped forward and placed a thin envelope on the table. No logo, no letterhead, just weight. Alessandro slid it toward me. Open it. I did. Inside was a thumb drive and a single sheet of paper with a list of dates and times. Surveillance logs, Alessandro said. From their team, not the ones they filed. I stared at him. How did you get this? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. What's on the drive? I asked. Alessandro's gaze held mine, steady. A conversation. My blood went still. Between who? I whispered. Kells, Alessandro said. And someone who thinks he can buy promotions. My throat tightened. And it's clean? Alessandro's expression hardened. It's real. I closed my eyes for a second and forced myself to think like a lawyer instead of a woman standing too close to a storm. New York is one-party consent, I said slowly, testing. Audio is admissible if it's lawfully obtained. Alessandro's mouth curved, faint. You're already building your argument. Don't, I snapped. Don't make this feel like a game. His eyes sharpened. It isn't. That's why you'll do it right. I stared at the folder again, at the planted deposit, at the complaint. They're going to offer me a deal, I said. Immunity if I cooperate. Yes, Alessandro replied. And if I don't, I continued, they'll indict me or ruin me anyway. Alessandro's gaze didn't move. Yes. A bitter laugh scraped out of me. So the only way out is to burn them first. Alessandro watched me like he'd been waiting for that sentence. Yes, he said quietly. Now you understand. My stomach twisted because part of me did understand. Not the violence, the strategy. Systems didn't collapse because someone asked nicely. They collapsed because someone forced accountability into the light. I looked up. You're going to make them disappear after this. It wasn't a question. Alessandro's expression went still. The air changed. That depends, he said softly. My pulse kicked. Depends on what? On you, he replied. The answer landed like a cage door closing. I stepped back half a pace, fury flaring. No, Alessandro didn't move. You don't get to say no and still expect me to protect you. My spine chilled. I didn't ask you to protect me. Yes, he said. You did. The moment you called Vincent. The moment you got into my car. Anger rose hot. That doesn't mean I let you decide who lives and dies. Alessandro's gaze sharpened. Then decide. The words hit hard, because he wasn't offering control as a kindness. He was demanding it as a price. I forced my breathing to steady. I will not be complicit in murder, I said, voice low. Not for my career, not for my life, not for you. A beat of silence. Then Alessandro nodded once, slow. Good, he murmured. I blinked. Good? His mouth curved slightly. If you had said otherwise, I would have lost interest. The admission sent something cold and strange through me. Even now he was testing, always testing. I lifted my chin. If we do this, we do it legally. Alessandro's eyes held mine. As legally as the world allows. That's not an answer, I snapped. It's the only honest one, he replied. This city is not built for saints, Sienna. It's built for people who choose where to put their sins. My stomach turned, because the part of me that was still purely idealistic, still convinced the law was a clean thing if you held it hard enough, was shrinking under the weight of reality. Fine, I said, voice tight. We expose them. We force their hand. We make the narrative collapse. Alessandro's gaze burned into me. And then? I held his stare. Then I make my choice. Something flashed in his eyes. Approval, hunger, something that looked like relief wrapped in steel. Good, he murmured. Now you sound like someone who survives. Public Integrity's office smelled like clean carpet and old power. The kind of space where people spoke softly because they liked the sound of authority more than they liked truth. They made me wait in a glass-walled room with a bowl of mints and a stack of pamphlets about ethical obligations. The irony tasted like metal. When they finally brought me in, there were 3 of them. A supervisor with tired eyes, an investigator who wouldn't meet my gaze, and Detective Rowan Kells leaning against the far wall like he was there to enjoy the show. Melissa Klein wasn't in the room, but her shadow was. I could feel it. Kells smiled when he saw me. It was the kind of smile that had never had to pay for anything it wanted. Ms. Hart, he said lightly. Thanks for coming. I sat without being invited. I placed my tote bag on the table and folded my hands. Calm, controlled, like I wasn't a public defender with a target on her back, like I was something else. What is this? I asked, voice flat. Besides an attempt to intimidate me into cooperating with a case you don't have? The supervisor's expression tightened. We have concerns. You have a narrative, I cut in, and you're hoping I'll panic and make it easier for you. His smile widened. Look at you, still fighting. I met his gaze. I'm not the one who should be worried about a fight. A flicker of irritation crossed his eyes. Good. Let him feel the shift. The supervisor slid a folder toward me. A copy of the planted deposit. Photos. The ethics complaint. The same story, sanitized and official. We're giving you an opportunity, the supervisor said. If you cooperate, we can mitigate. Mitigate what? I asked. The felony you're about to accuse me of committing? The investigator cleared his throat. Ms. Hart, you've had contact with a private citizen, I said evenly, refusing to say Alessandro's name in their room, refusing to make him a spell they could use. Kells laughed softly. Private citizen, that's cute. I leaned forward slightly. This is what you have? Photos of me walking outside? A deposit record I didn't authorize? An anonymous complaint that reads like it was written by someone who's watched too many courtroom dramas? The supervisor's jaw tightened. We can subpoena your devices. You can, I agreed. And I will comply with lawful orders. But don't confuse your ability to harass me with the ability to prove wrongdoing. Kells pushed off the wall and stepped closer to the table. His presence was meant to feel like pressure. It didn't. It felt like desperation. You've got a choice, he said, voice low. You can help us, or you can go down with him. There it is, I murmured. Kells's eyes narrowed. What? The coercion, I said calmly. The real purpose. Thank you for making it obvious. The supervisor frowned. Detective. Kells ignored him, eyes locked on mine. Wear a wire. Give us what we need. We'll make this go away. My pulse stayed steady, even as my stomach turned. And if I refuse, I asked. Kels's smile was thin. Then you lose your license. Your job, your reputation, maybe your sister's tuition gets harder to pay. Cold shot through me. I held his gaze and let my voice go quieter. You've done your homework, I said. Kel's eyes glinted. We all do our homework. I nodded slowly. Then I reached into my tote bag and pulled out a single sheet of paper. Not the drive, not the logs. A subpoena. Signed, stamped. A request for the surveillance authorization and chain of custody documentation relating to investigative materials obtained concerning Sienna Hart. The supervisor stared. What is this? I smiled without warmth. This is what happens when you try to scare a lawyer. Kel's expression tightened. You don't have authority. Oh, I do, I said softly. Because you referred this to public integrity, and public integrity just created a record of your interest in me, which makes your surveillance relevant, which makes your paperwork discoverable if you want to. Pretend you're doing this by the book. The supervisor's eyes hardened. We're not obligated to. You are, I replied. Unless you want a court to ask why you surveilled a public defender without probable cause. A beat of silence. Kels's gaze shifted, sharp. You're bluffing. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I let him feel what Alessandro had felt when I returned that $1. No, I said. I'm documenting. The supervisor leaned back, expression tightening with something that looked like calculation. Then Kels leaned in closer, voice dropping. You think you're smart, he murmured. But you're already compromised. And if you don't take our deal, we can make this uglier. My pulse stayed steady. Do it, I said quietly. Kels blinked. What? Make it uglier, I repeated, voice calm. Because the uglier you make it, the clearer it becomes who you are. His jaw flexed. I watched him, realize, too late, that I wasn't alone in the way he'd assumed. Not because of Alessandro, because of me. Because I had done what I always did. I had prepared. I slid the thumb drive across the table. The supervisor stared at it. What is that? I looked directly at Kels. A conversation, I said. His eyes sharpened. Don't. I tilted my head. Why? Worried about narratives now? The supervisor reached for the drive. Kel's hand shot out fast, too fast, stopping it. The room went still. That one movement said everything. The supervisor's eyes narrowed. Detective? Kel's smile didn't reach his eyes. It's nothing. I leaned back in my chair, heart steady. It's not nothing, I said. It's you. Kel's gaze cut into mine. You don't know what you're doing. I smiled, slow and cold. Yes, I said softly. I do. By the time I walked out of that office, my hands were trembling, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of control. The hallway felt brighter. The air felt thinner. Outside, the city kept moving like it always did. People laughed, cars honked, someone argued into a phone about dinner reservations. No one knew that in a quiet office upstairs, a story had shifted, a story that had been written to destroy me. I didn't see Alessandro's car at first. I felt it, that familiar prickle at the back of my neck, like being watched by something that didn't miss. Then the black sedan eased into view at the curb. The back door opened. Alessandro didn't get out. He just looked at me. An invitation, a command, both. I walked to the car and got in. The door shut with a soft click that sounded final. His gaze swept over me, quick, precise. You're shaking, he observed. I'm alive, I replied. A faint smile touched his mouth. Good. I stared at him. They tried to threaten my sister. Something dark moved through his eyes. Did they say her name? He asked, voice low. Yes, I said. Silence. Heavy. Controlled. Then Alessandro exhaled once, slow. That was a mistake, he murmured. I leaned forward slightly. Don't. His gaze snapped to mine. I mean it, I said, voice sharp. You promised me. No family, no gifts, no threats, no contact. A beat. Then he nodded once. You're right, he said quietly. I promised. And I'm holding you to it, I replied. His eyes held mine, and something in them shifted, something like reluctant respect. Good, he murmured again, as if my defiance was the only thing keeping him from becoming exactly what everyone feared. I swallowed, throat tight. What happens now? Alessandro's gaze turned toward the windshield. Now they scramble. He looked back at me. And now you pay, he added softly. My stomach tightened. Pay what? The cost of winning, he said. The words hit harder because they weren't a threat. They were a truth. I thought of my office, my colleagues, the fragile trust I'd built in a system that loved to punish anyone who made it look ugly. I swallowed. They're going to come after me anyway. Alessandro's mouth curved. Yes. And I can't go back like nothing happened, I said. His gaze held mine, steady. No. My chest tightened. So what's the cost? Alessandro didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was quiet. You lose the illusion that the law is enough, he said. And you decide what you become when you know that. The sentence sat between us like weight. I stared at him, heart pounding. I'm not becoming you, I said. Alessandro's eyes sharpened. I don't want you to. I blinked, thrown. He leaned in slightly, not touching, not crossing the line, just close enough that his voice felt like it belonged inside my chest. I want you to become the thing that makes me less of a monster, he murmured. My throat tightened. That's not fair. No, he agreed. It isn't. I sat back, breath unsteady. What did you give them? Alessandro's eyes went colder. Enough. I frowned. Enough to destroy Kells. Alessandro didn't deny it. I felt something twist in my stomach. Not guilt, but inevitability. And what do you lose? I asked. A slow pause. Then Alessandro said, Vincent. My blood went still. What? Alessandro's jaw tightened. They took a shot at him this morning. My lungs forgot how to work. Is he? My voice cracked. Alive, Alessandro said, sharp. Barely. The air in the car turned metallic. I stared at him, trying to reconcile the calm with the violence under it. You didn't tell me, I whispered. Alessandro's gaze held mine, and for the first time I saw something under the control. Not weakness, fear, not for himself, for the thing he was, trying not to lose. I don't tell you things that would make you run, he said quietly. My throat tightened. You don't get to decide what makes me run. His eyes flashed. No. A beat, then softer. You're right. Silence stretched. The city moved around us, and somewhere inside me, a door closed. Not because I wanted it to, because the choice had finally become clear. I could walk away now, try to crawl back into my old life and pretend this hadn't changed me. Or I could admit what I already knew. They weren't going to let me go back. Not clean, not untouched, not after I'd forced their hand. I swallowed hard. Take me to Vincent. Alessandro's gaze sharpened. No. I stared. Excuse me? He's guarded, Alessandro said, voice firm. And you being there makes him a bigger target. You don't get to isolate me, I snapped. His eyes darkened. I'm not isolating you. I'm keeping you alive. I didn't agree to be kept, I said. A beat. Then Alessandro leaned back slightly, studying me like I was a question he couldn't solve with force. What do you want? He asked quietly. The same question he'd asked in the car before. The same question he'd built a trap around. This time I answered without flinching. I want this to end, I said. I want my name clean. I want Kells and anyone like him away from my life. And I want you. My voice caught, and I hated myself for it. I want you to stop pretending control is the same thing as safety. Alessandro's gaze held mine. Then slowly, he nodded once. Okay, he said. The word sounded like a concession, like a sacrifice. It scared me more than his threats. 2 days later, the story broke. Not mine. Theirs. A whistleblower in public integrity leaked the audio. Someone, maybe the supervisor, maybe the investigator, maybe someone with a conscience that finally got loud enough, sent the conversation up the chain with a note that couldn't be ignored. The task force's private funding, Kells's promises, the way he'd spoken about me like I was a tool. A judge ordered an inquiry. The DA's office scrambled. Melissa Klein disappeared from the courthouse for 48 hours and came back with eyes that looked like she'd swallowed something poisonous and decided not to choke. They dropped their pending referral against me. Not with an apology, with silence. And silence in this city was the closest thing to mercy you could expect. My supervisor called me into her office that same day and closed the door. She didn't sit. She looked at me like she'd been forced to choose between loyalty and survival had won. "They're offering you a transfer," she said quietly. My stomach tightened. "Where?" "Anywhere that isn't here," she replied. Or, a pause. "You can resign." The word landed heavy. Resign meant losing the work that had shaped me. The cases. The clients who looked at me like I was the last solid thing in a room full of quicksand. It meant admitting the system had succeeded in pushing me out. My throat tightened. "And if I don't?" Her eyes softened, just barely. "Then you'll keep getting cases flagged. You'll keep getting watched. You'll keep getting put in positions where you have to choose between your ethics and your life." I stared at her. "This is punishment," I whispered. She didn't deny it. "This is the cost," she said softly, "of being right." I left her office with my resignation letter half written in my head. I sat at my desk for an hour staring at a stack of files, names, charges, lives, and realized something that made my chest ache. I could stay and become a symbol, a warning, a martyr, or I could leave and stay alive enough to fight another way. I thought of my sister, my mother, the threat spoken out, loud. I thought of Vincent bleeding somewhere because he'd stood too close to Alessandro. And I thought of the dollar bill on my nightstand, the reminder of the line I'd drawn and the line I'd crossed. That night, I walked into Alessandro's office again. Not because he summoned me, because I chose it. He was alone this time, standing by the window with the city behind him like a kingdom he'd never asked for but refused to surrender. He turned when I entered. His gaze found my face and stilled. "You made a decision," he said. I didn't sit. I didn't let him tell me to. "Yes," I replied. He waited. I pulled the resignation letter from my bag and placed it on his table. His eyes flicked down to it, then back up. "You're leaving," he said, voice unreadable. "I'm being forced out," I corrected. "There's a difference." A slow, dangerous stillness settled into him. "They touched you," he murmured. "They tried," I said, "and I'm not giving them the satisfaction of watching me bleed in public." His jaw flexed. "And what do you want from me?" he asked, quiet. I inhaled. Then I reached into my pocket and pulled out the dollar bill. I held it up between us. The same crisp paper that had been an insult, then a marker, then a promise. He watched it like it was a symbol he'd never expected to matter. "I want the contract," I said. Alessandro didn't move. "The consulting agreement." "Yes." His eyes narrowed. "Why?" "Because if I'm going to be hunted," I said evenly, "I'm going to be paid like it. Because if I'm leaving my job, I'm not doing it to become your kept secret. I'm doing it to become your equal in the only language you respect." Alessandro's gaze burned. "And because," I continued, voice tightening. I'm not going to pretend I can unsee what I've seen. Silence. Then he walked to the table and opened a drawer. He pulled out the contract, already prepared, already waiting like he'd known I'd arrive at this point. He set it down in front of me with a pen. I stared at the pages, at the clauses he'd built to give me exits, control, authority. Then I looked at him. This doesn't make me yours, I said. Alessandro's mouth curved, faint. Nothing makes you mine. I didn't believe him, not fully, but I believed the effort. And in his world, effort was cost. I flipped to the last page. There was a line near the signature block that made my breath catch. Simple, almost archaic. Consideration, $1. My throat tightened. Of course he would take the first thing he'd ever offered me, humiliation wrapped in paper, and turn it into the legal backbone of a vow. I looked up. You did this on purpose. Alessandro's gaze held mine. Yes. My fingers tightened around the dollar bill. I'm not signing a contract for you to own my mind, I said. Alessandro's voice dropped. Then don't. He leaned back, giving me space the way he had in the car, the only kind of space he knew how to offer. Say no, he murmured, and walk out. The invitation wasn't gentle. It was real. My heart pounded as I stared at the page, at the consideration line, at the signature block waiting for my name like a door I could close behind myself. This was the irreversible moment. Not because he'd force it, because he wouldn't, because he wanted the choice to be mine. I picked up the pen. Alessandro didn't move. I signed. My name cut across the paper in ink that looked too dark, too final. When I finished, I set the pen down and held up the dollar bill again. This, I said, voice steady, is not your reminder anymore. His eyes flicked to it. It's mine, I continued. It's the price of my yes, and it comes with terms. Alessandro's gaze sharpened. Name them. I stepped closer until the air between us felt tight with everything we refused to call desire. No lies, I said. Not to me. A beat. Alessandro's jaw tightened, then he nodded once. No harm to my family, I added. Ever. His eyes held mine. Ever. And if you decide to do something that crosses the line, I finished, you tell me first. You give me a chance to stop you. Silence. Then Alessandro spoke, low and controlled. I will try, he said. It wasn't a promise of purity. It was a promise of effort. It was the closest thing he could offer without lying. My chest tightened because I understood the truth under it. Choosing him meant choosing a world where try was sometimes the only clean word available. It meant accepting that the cost wasn't just my job. It was my innocence, my ability to pretend law could fix everything if you argued hard enough. Alessandro held out his hand, not rushed, not demanding. This time, I didn't place my hand in his. I placed the dollar bill in it. His fingers closed around the paper slowly, like he understood the weight. The city lights reflected in his pale eyes, making them look almost human for a moment. What are you doing? He murmured. I swallowed hard. Paying, I said quietly. In full. His gaze cut into mine. For what? For the moment I stop pretending I can keep my life untouched, I replied. For the moment, I admit, I'm choosing you. A beat. Then Alessandro lifted the dollar bill and slid it into the inside pocket of his coat, the same place he'd put it the first time, when it had been a trophy. Now it looked like something else. A vow. He stepped closer until I could smell cedar and smoke, and that faint metallic edge that always warned me what he was. He didn't touch me. He waited. I exhaled and nodded once. Permission. Alessandro's hand rose, slow, and he cupped my jaw. Firm, possessive, but careful, like restraint, was a language he was still learning. His voice dropped to a whisper. You understand what this costs, he said. Yes, I replied, throat tight. And you're doing it anyway. Yes. His thumb brushed my cheek once, almost gentle. Then he leaned in, not to take, not to claim with teeth or heat, but to press his forehead to mine like a promise that didn't need witnesses. Outside the windows, Manhattan glittered like a lie the city told itself every night. Inside, my old life sat on paper with my signature at the bottom, and there was no undoing it. Alessandro's breath warmed my skin. Welcome, he murmured, voice dark, to the part of the story where you stop being a target and start being an answer. I closed my eyes for 1 second, then I opened them, and I realized, clean and sharp, that the first time he offered me $1, it was meant to humiliate me. The last time, it was something else entirely. A legal consideration. A choice. A sentence. And the cost of it was written, plain as ink and inevitable as blood, $1.